Felix Moncla disappeared. That was in 1953, November 23rd. He was a pilot for the U.S. Air Force. His plane, an F-89 Scorpion jet, just vanished, and so did he. No trace of the plane, no trace of Felix Moncla. It was a really strange event. People still talk about it. They talk about what happened on the radar screens. They talk about a UFO. Some people think it was an alien abduction. Let's go back to that night. It was cold. It was dark. Moncla was based at Kinross Air Force Base in Michigan. The base was near Sault Ste. Marie. That's in the Upper Peninsula, and it's right by Lake Superior. This area was important back then. It was the Cold War. There was a lot of worry about Soviet planes flying in, so air defenses were on high alert. Radar operators watched their screens very closely. On that night, something popped up on the radar. It wasn't a normal plane, it was an unidentified target. It was flying over Lake Superior, and it was moving fast. This target was not supposed to be there. So the ground control operators had to act. They needed to identify this blip. They needed to see what it was, and if it was a threat, they needed to intercept it. That's where Felix Moncla came in. He was a first lieutenant. He was a skilled pilot. He and his radar observer, Second Lieutenant Robert Wilson, got into their F-89C Scorpion. This plane was an all-weather interceptor. It was designed to fly at night. It was designed to chase down unknown aircraft, and that's what Moncla and Wilson were sent to do. They took off from Kinross. Their mission was simple: find that blip, identify it. And ground control was guiding them. They could see Moncla's plane, and they could see the unknown target. The blip was flying at a high altitude, and it was moving at a pretty fast speed. Moncla was told where to go. He started to chase the unknown object. He was getting closer. The ground controllers watched their screens intently. They were directing Moncla, giving him vectors. Then something really weird happened. Moncla's plane, the F-89, got very close to the unknown target. On the radar screen, the two blips got closer and closer. They were moving at similar speeds now. And then, the ground controller saw something incredible. The two blips merged. They became one single blip on the radar screen. It looked like Moncla's plane had flown right into the unknown object. Or maybe the unknown object had flown right into Moncla's plane. Everyone in the radar room was confused. And then they were alarmed. They tried to contact Moncla. They called out to him over the radio. But there was no answer. No sound from his plane. Just silence. And then, the single merged blip, the one that had been Moncla's plane and the unknown object, continued on its path. It flew for a short while, and then it just vanished from the radar screen. Gone. Completely gone. This was a massive problem. A military jet with 2 men on board had just disappeared. And it had disappeared right after merging with an unknown object on radar. The Air Force immediately launched a search. It was a huge effort. Planes were sent out. Boats searched the waters of Lake Superior. They looked for wreckage. They looked for signs of Moncla and Wilson. But they found nothing. Not a single piece of the F-89. Not a life vest. Not a floating seat cushion. Nothing at all. It was like the plane and the men had simply ceased to exist. This lack of any wreckage made the mystery even bigger. If a plane crashes into a lake, there's usually debris. Even small pieces. Especially a lake like Superior. It's a huge lake. But it's not an ocean. And a lot of things float. But there was nothing. It was like the plane had been taken away. The official explanation came out pretty quickly. The Air Force said that Moncla was chasing a Canadian aircraft. They said it was a Royal Canadian Air Force C-47 transport plane. They said the radar operators must have misidentified it. And then they said that Moncla's F-89 probably crashed into Lake Superior. They said the pilots probably got disoriented, and then they just went down. That was the official story. But this explanation had huge holes in it. It didn't make sense to a lot of people. First, the Canadian Air Force was contacted. They said they had no C-47s in that area at that time, not one that matched the radar blip's path or speed. And even if there was a Canadian plane, why would the blips merge? And why would Moncla not respond? And why was there no wreckage? A C-47 is not a fast jet, and Moncla's F-89 was much faster. How could a fast jet merge with a slow transport plane on radar? It just didn't add up. The official story felt like a cover-up. It felt like they just wanted to close the case. They wanted to make the strangeness go away, but the strangeness didn't go away. Instead, the story started to spread. People talked about the unknown blip. They talked about the merging blips, and they talked about the complete disappearance. This was happening at a time when UFO sightings were a big deal. The early 1950s was a peak time for interest in flying saucers. People were already looking up at the sky. They were already wondering if we were alone. And then this happened. A military pilot chasing an unknown object vanished. This was not just a blurry photo or a distant light. This was a radar track. This was ground control talking to a pilot. This was real-time tracking of something very unusual. So, the UFO connection became the dominant theory for many. What else could it be? If there was no Canadian plane, then what was Moncla chasing, and what made his plane disappear like that? The idea that it was an extraterrestrial craft quickly gained traction. People started to believe that Moncla and Wilson had encountered a UFO, and that this UFO had somehow caused their disappearance. But how? This is where the alien abduction theory comes in. It's not just that Moncla saw a UFO, it's that the UFO took him, and it took his plane. The merging blip on the radar screen is key to this idea. What if the unknown object wasn't just flying near Moncla's plane? What if it enveloped it? What if it somehow absorbed it? Or what if it used some kind of advanced technology to lift the entire F-89 and its crew right out of our atmosphere? Or maybe it just disintegrated the plane entirely, but then why would the merged blip continue for a bit before vanishing? That detail is tricky. Some people think the UFO literally picked up Moncla's plane, like a giant magnet or like some kind of tractor beam. They believe the aliens wanted to study the plane. Or they wanted to study the pilots. Maybe they wanted to understand human technology or human biology. It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie, but when all the normal explanations fail, people start looking at the impossible. And the disappearance of Moncla and Wilson fits that pattern. There was just no rational earthly explanation that stuck. Think about it from a logical standpoint. An F-89 Scorpion is a big plane. It's made of metal. It has a lot of parts. If it crashed into Lake Superior, even if it sank to the bottom, there should be some evidence. Oil slicks, small pieces of fuselage, something. The lake is vast, yes, but search and rescue operations are very good. They have sonar, they have experience, and finding absolutely nothing after an extensive search is very, very rare for a plane of that size. This lack of wreckage is one of the strongest points for those who believe in the alien abduction theory. It's not just that a plane crashed, it's that it vanished without a trace. It's as if it was completely removed from our dimension, or taken to another location entirely. The only things left were the radar blips. And the silent radio. The government's shifting stories didn't help. First, the Canadian plane story. Then, when that fell apart, a kind of general silence. This made people even more suspicious. They wondered what the Air Force really knew. Was there more to the story? Were they covering up the truth about extraterrestrial contact? In the Cold War era, any hint of something unknown was often classified. The fear was that the public would panic, or that the enemy might gain some advantage. So, a simple official denial was usually the easiest path, even if it wasn't true. This case, the Moncla incident, became a classic example of an unexplained aerial phenomenon. It happened in an official capacity, it involved military personnel, it was tracked by military radar, and it ended in total mystery. It wasn't some farmer in a field seeing strange lights. It was a serious event. Over the years, many researchers have tried to solve the Moncla mystery. They've looked at the old radar logs, they've talked to the people who were there, if they were still alive. They've re-examined the weather conditions. Some have suggested that maybe the radar simply malfunctioned, or that it was an atmospheric anomaly, a strange reflection. But that doesn't explain the plane's path, or the chase, or the radio silence, or the complete disappearance of the plane itself. Their radar technology in the 1950s wasn't perfect, but it was reliable enough for these sorts of operations. And the operators were trained. They knew what they were looking at, generally. Other theories popped up. What if Moncla got into a disorienting spin? What if he experienced vertigo? And crashed. But again, the blips on radar, the merging, the lack of wreckage. These details undermine those more mundane explanations. A pilot error doesn't make two blips merge. And it doesn't make a plane vanish without debris. What about a top-secret experimental aircraft? That's a common theory for some UFO sightings during the Cold War. The US or Soviets flying something new. But it seems very unlikely that a US Air Force interceptor would be sent to chase one of its own experimental planes. And it would be even stranger for such a plane to cause the disappearance of another US military jet. Plus, the Air Force would likely have a record of such an experimental plane, and they would almost certainly not send a standard interceptor to blindly chase it down. So the alien abduction theory remains. It's not a provable theory, of course. There's no concrete evidence to support it, no alien message, no wreckage on a distant planet. But it's a theory born out of the complete absence of any other satisfying answer. It fills the void left by a vanishing plane and two missing men. The story of Felix Moncla and Robert Wilson is a tragedy. 2 lives lost, a plane gone, a family left with no closure, and a huge question mark hanging over it all. The fact that it happened in 1953 means that many of the witnesses are long gone. The radar equipment from back then is not easily studied today. Time has made the mystery even harder to solve. But the story lives on because it touches on deep human fears and curiosity. The fear of the unknown, the wonder about life beyond Earth, and the unsettling idea that we might not be in control. That something out there could just reach down, take a plane and its crew, and leave no trace. It's a humbling thought. Moncla's disappearance is often mentioned in lists of famous UFO incidents. It's not just a sighting, it's an interaction, it's a chase, and it's a disappearance. All officially recorded, at least initially. The sequence of events on the radar screen is what makes it so compelling. The merging blips, that's the detail that really sets this case apart. It suggests a physical interaction, not just a visual one. Imagine being one of those radar operators, seeing Moncla's blip, seeing the unknown blip, watching them get closer, and then seeing them become one, and then watching that one blip move off and simply wink out of existence. That would stick with you for the rest of your life. It would be a moment that challenges everything you thought you knew about the world. And it did challenge those who saw it. They couldn't explain it. This case happened before the official U.S. Air Force UFO investigation Project Blue Book became as well known as it later would. But it fit right into the types of cases they struggled with. Cases where there was radar confirmation. Cases where military personnel were involved. Cases where conventional explanations just fell flat. Blue Book often tried to find mundane explanations. They looked for weather balloons. They looked for temperature inversions. They looked for Venus. But for Moncla, none of those worked. The sheer finality of the disappearance, without debris, was always the sticking point. The memory of Felix Moncla and Robert Wilson lives on, not just as a military tragedy, but as one of the enduring UFO mysteries. The idea of alien abduction, of being taken by an advanced civilization, seems far-fetched to some. But to others, it's the only explanation that makes any sense for what happened that cold night over Lake Superior. A pilot went to investigate, and he never came back. His plane was never found. And the only thing left was a strange blip on a radar screen that merged with another unknown blip before both vanished into thin air. It's a story that continues to haunt people. It makes you wonder. And maybe that's the point. The universe is big. And sometimes things happen that we just can't explain.